Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Why We Write About Ourselves, 20 Memoirists on Why They Expose Themselves and Others in the Name of Literature. Edited by Meredith Maran. Narrated by Tanya and Patrick Lawlor. Introduction. I've given my memoirs far more thought than any of my marriages. You can't divorce a book. Gloria Swanson. Gloria's right. You can't divorce a memoir. But, as the 20 successful authors in this book attest, you can, and some do, divorce, disown, defriend, or defame a memoirist. If you want to ruin your life and/or others, there's really no more surefire method than writing a true life tale according to you. Why, then, do so many authors risk public, private, and/or professional exoration for the dubious pleasure of writing about themselves? What is it about sharing one's deepest thoughts, feelings, and experiences with others that makes it worth the mayhem and mishigas? Without demand, of course, there would be no supply. So we must also ask why we read memoirs. For centuries, readers, reviewers, and social commentators have been gobbling up first-person narratives, all the while diagnosing the book's authors with attention-seeking disorders. Is the urge to read memoirs the same urge that makes us peek into strangers' undraped windows at night? Not just because we're nosy, but to learn something from how other people live, in order to live better lives ourselves? Whatever the reasons for our attachment to memoir, it's a phenomenon that's unlikely to go away anytime soon. The genre has been around since St. Augustine wrote his 13-volume Confessions around AD 400. In one form or another, memoir lives on today. In the journal entry, blog, confessional email, or Facebook post you wrote an hour ago. Forgive us, Descartes. Today's philosophy of existence might best be expressed thusly: I overshare, therefore I am. People who love memoirs claim that the telling of the true life story is the contemporary incantation of oral history, an invaluable contribution to the Enlightenment, the collective consciousness, perhaps even the evolution of the species. People who don't love memoirs say the genre is a scourge upon the human race, a playing field upon which attention-craving, sensationalistic, crass, and craven narcissists headbutt and navel-gaze their way to the bestseller lists. Throughout this book, 20 very different memoirists share their very different reasons for doing what they do, and their sometimes different, sometimes overlapping approaches to the controversies that surround the genre. I'm always asking myself if material I have from my own life would be best used in a novel or a memoir or a short story or an essay, says Cheryl Strayed. I was moved to write Wild as a memoir because I thought that was the best way to tell that particular story. I actually never intended to publish a book, says Ismail Bea, whose best-selling A Long Way Gone describes his life as a 12-year-old soldier in Sierra Leone. Writing became for me a way to prove my existence. Some of us are the designated rememberers, the Death of Santini author Pat Conroy told me. That's why memoir interests us, because we're the ones who pass the stories. I have never written memoir by choice, says Edwidge Danticat, author of Brother, I'm Dying. Each time I write memoir, in short or long form, something happens that compels me to do it, something that feels pressing and urgent, something that there is no other way to express. How does memoir writing differ from journal keeping? Should a memoir be a work of art, produced for the benefit of the reader, or a cathartic writing experience for the benefit of the author? People want to believe that a memoirist has simply opened a vein and bled on the page. According to Ayelet Waldman, that's a diary. A diary can be emotionally satisfying. It can be great therapy, but it's not necessarily good writing. A memoir is not simply stringing together the 5 or 10 good stories you've been telling about your wacky childhood for your whole life, Nick Flynn says. But A.M. Holmes says she wrote a memoir about her adoption to organize the information in the experience, to put it in a container, if only to set the container aside for a while. When I asked the writers about the morality of memoir, whether memoirists are obligated to protect the privacy of the loved and not loved ones in their lives, emotions ran high. Sue Monk Kidd said that writing memoir is a dance between being true to my need to write authentically and my responsibility to those around me not to cross over into their private hearts and extract something that doesn't belong to me. Edmund White said, memoir should be extremely honest and personal. It should show the author for who he is, warts and all. A memoirist's contract with the reader is that you're telling the truth and nothing but the truth. That requires telling everything there is to say about everyone involved. What I worried about most writing the memoir, said Kate Christensen, was offending people or causing anyone pain. I'm used to writing about invented characters. Writing about real people was a huge stretch, a leap into new territory. At first I was worried that my book would be really exploitive, Anne Lamott said, but then my editor said, it won't be exploitive if you don't exploit anyone. Whatever your thoughts and feelings about this provocative, evocative genre, whether you're a producer or a consumer of memoir, or neither, or both, I hope you'll benefit from the literary, emotional, psychological, and moral self-examination that's on display in these chapters. In their own books, the memoirists included here bear all. In this book, they bear all about bearing all, excavating the personal and professional agonies and ecstasies, moral conundrums, and psychological battles that come with the job. Meredith Maran.
Chapter 1. Ishmael Bea. There were all kinds of stories told about the war that made it sound as if it was happening in a faraway and different land. It wasn't until refugees started passing through our town that we began to see that it was actually taking place in our country. Opening A Long Way Gone, 2007. In 1993, when Ishmael Bea was 12 years old, anti-government soldiers invaded his village of Mugbuemo, Sierra Leone. Along with many other boys, he fled the village, spent months wandering the countryside, and was then conscripted into the government army at age 13. In 1996, after witnessing and committing unthinkable acts of war, Ishmael was rescued by UNICEF, which helped him with his rehabilitation and reinsertion into normal life. He was later adopted by an American woman, Laura Sims, and found a home and a school, the United Nations International School, in New York City. From there, Ishmael made his way to Oberlin College, where he studied political science and took some creative writing courses with the novelist Dan Shawn. By the time he graduated in 2004, Ishmael had a draft of the memoir that would become A Long Way Gone, his account of his years as a child soldier. The book was an immediate hit. It has since sold more than 1.5 million copies, but its publication was not without controversy. In early 2009, Rupert Murdoch's Australian investigated Ishmael's story and said that his account was exaggerated. The paper claimed that the attack on Ishmael's village had happened in 1995, not 1993 as described in A Long Way Gone. Since Ishmael had been rescued by UNICEF in 1996, the Australian claimed, he'd been a child soldier for months, not years. 3 days after the article appeared, Ishmael published a rebuttal saying, "I am right about my story. This is not something one gets wrong. Sad to say, my story is all true." Ishmael's publisher, Sarah Crichton at Ferrer, Strauss and Giroux, stood firmly behind him. His adoptive mother said, "I knew this was not fraudulent. The last thing that Ishmael would want is to lie about what he cannot forget." For Ishmael, being accused of lying is small potatoes compared to living with those memories. "If I choose to feel guilty for what I have done, I will want to be dead myself," he has said. "I live knowing that I have been given a second life, and I just try to have fun and be happy and live it the best I can. The Vitals. Birthday, November 23, 1980. Born and raised? Born in Matru-Jong and raised in Mogbuemo, Banff District, Sierra Leone. Home now, New York, New York. Family. Married to Priscilla Kunkau Hoveda, one daughter. Schooling. United Nations International School, Oberlin College, B.A. in Political Science. Day job, author and activist, volunteer for UNICEF and Human Rights Watch. Notable notes. A Long Way Gone was selected as the second title featured in Starbucks's Book Break program. Ishmael was nominated for a Quill Award for Debut Author of the Year. Time named A Long Way Gone one of its top 10 nonfiction books of 2007. In an interview with his Oberlin College mentor Dan Shawn, Ishmael said, "When you're writing, you feel like there are probably other forces at work, like the words are just coming out of you. They're very sweet moments, but they don't last very long." Twitter, @IshmaelBea. Website, ishmaelbea.com. The Collected Works. Memoir, A Long Way Gone, 2007. Novel, Radiance of Tomorrow, 2014. Ishmael Bea, Why I Write About Myself. I do not consider myself a memoirist. I consider myself a writer who happened to be introduced as a writer to the world through a memoir, a non-fictional book. I actually never intended to publish a book. Prior to making the commitment to write my memoir, writing had become for me a way to prove my existence. Apart from my passport, I had no physical objects or documentation to do so. I remember when I began applying to schools in the United States, I was asked to provide a report card. "I don't have one," I would say. Often the response was, "Well, everyone has a report card." I would chuckle and correct them. "I'm from Sierra Leone, and I don't have one." When I started high school in New York, I wrote an essay titled, "Why I Do Not Have a Report Card." I got a glimpse then that my core reason for writing would be to expose people to certain realities and hope to deepen their understanding of the other, of places that may seem far away. A sense of urgency made me do it. The story of A Long Way Gone was the first story I needed to tell with urgency. There were other stories within me, but this one possessed me. Writing it also came out of several frustrations. I felt the need to correct the way my people and my country were portrayed. Each time I said to someone that I was from Sierra Leone, they responded by telling me about the horrors of the Civil War, as though it had always been that way, and as if war was the only identity of my country. There was no context, and more important, no human context in the way my people were presented. Here I was, a young man living away from home, carrying a splinter of the very story that was misrepresented. So I had to do something about it, using my small part of a much larger story. Writing as if each book might be my last. Whether I am writing nonfiction or fiction, I always write about things that are meaningful to me, situations that speak to my being. I approach each piece of writing, whether it's a short story, a book, or a novel, as though it were the first and last story I will write. There was risk involved. I worried that people wouldn't want to read my memoir because their initial response to the subject matter was only a reaction to the violence, the kind they hear or read about, without the human context or framework. That framework has the power to make a person understand that there is nowhere in the world where people will choose violence if they have other viable ways of living. My aspiration was to show how everyone is capable of violence if you happen to find yourself in circumstances that propel you toward violence as a way of life. I wanted to show that no one can decide ahead of time whether you will embrace violence or not until you are in a certain situation. I very much wanted to show the realities of war. At the same time, I was overwhelmed by the need to be careful not to write something that could be mistaken as an endorsement or a celebration of violence. I was fueled by the importance of putting the human face on war, the worst kind of war, and showing the strength of human beings to outlive life's worst circumstances. I wanted to show that beauty and hope can exist even when there is no reason for hope, even when it seems all has been lost. Protecting the innocent. For those people in my memoir who were alive and I could find, I explained to them what I was embarking on, and that I would present them from my point of view. Those who weren't comfortable, I used only their first names. As to my own privacy, I just wrote from how I thought about things as a child, in sort of a matter-of-fact way and unapologetically. I had to return to how I felt about things as a child, as a boy, not as the young man I had become by the time I wrote the book. I knew, though, from the beginning that I wouldn't share everything. It isn't possible to write about everything, and some things I needed to keep for my family and myself, the deepest intimacies of my emotions and experiences. My desire was to take moments of my life to make a point, and that is what I did. I feel satisfied that I succeeded in getting across what war does to human beings and the possibility of recovering. Those who haven't been in war can never truly understand it, but I made them come as close as possible to that reality. Being called a liar is not pleasant. When certain people in the media accused me of making up parts of my story and exaggerating the length of my time as a soldier, it was frustrating and annoying to argue with them about it. Those reporters weren't in my country during the war and had very little understanding of what happened and very little understanding of war in general. I found their claims ridiculous and unfounded, and hence they never went anywhere. I stand fully by what I wrote. When I wrote the memoir, I relied on the best of my memories, and I took out anything I doubted. My memoir was fact-checked. Memoirs don't just get published. Excerpts from my book were published in the New York Times Magazine before the book was released, and the magazine did its own fact-checking. So when certain people started with their nonsense, I just laughed. I wasn't a journalist who inserted himself in the war to experience it, and therefore had notepads, cameras, and the like to record what happened. Unfortunately, they approached my story from that angle, as if I had cameras and notepads with me the whole time. The media were caught up with this idea of the singular truth about the war in my country. Well, any sensible person would know that when several people experience the same event, they remember different aspects of that event. Still, all of their recollections would be truthful to what occurred. The guy standing with his back to me when I was shooting, as I was during the war, would have a very different telling of that event than mine. And yet both stories would be true to that experience. Lying is not right either. The question of morality arises in a memoir only if the writer deliberately tells a story of deceit or chooses to blatantly portray people through outright lies for purposes of slander and sensation. It's also immoral for the narrator to paint him or herself in a saintly light. Of course, when you write about people, you always write your version of the truth about them. You write about how you see them, not how they view themselves. Otherwise, they would be the authors. As a writer with any story, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, you make choices to show certain aspects of your characters, to make a point, or to introduce an idea, or to hint at what you want your readers to understand. Ishmael Bea's wisdom for memoir writers. Do not aspire to be a memoirist. Rather, seek to write your truth without thinking about the readers or publication. If you do that, you have already started writing someone else's story. Be completely open to discovering things about yourself as you delve into your memories. You'll be surprised at what your mind reveals to you about who you are. Never try to please those you write about. You will not succeed and will certainly ruin your story.
Chapter 2. Kate Christensen. Often, whenever I come up against anything painful or difficult, my mind escapes to food. I am sure I am far from alone in this. Even if I am too upset to eat, just the thought of a grilled cheese sandwich and a bowl of tomato soup is warm and cozy and savory and comforting. Opening, Blue Plate Special, 2013. Kate Christensen writes novels, memoirs, magazine features, essays, reviews, and a blog. She narrates some of her novels in the voices of men, others as women. Her memoir, Blue Plate Special, began as an ode to food and evolved into an exposé of her violent father and her childhood sexual assault. She's an unrepentant sensualist whose love story with her 20 years younger boyfriend and his family's New Hampshire farmhouse, the beautiful meals they cook, and the beautiful wine they drink in the 1860s house they remodeled together in Portland, Maine, and their winter walks through the woods with their beloved dog, Dingo, runs through her writings like an upbeat background hum. Kate Christensen can write a character who will make you yell at the book in your hand, and she can write a plate of pasta puttanesca that will make you want to take a bite of the page. Her books and her life are a celebration of edible, emotional, quotidian joy. And they are the redemption story of a woman who slept with the wrong men, drank too many drinks, and lived a whole lot of pain. Lucky us. We're the beneficiaries of all of it. The Vitals. Birthday, August 22, 1962. Born and raised, Berkeley, California. Home now, Portland, Maine. Family, boyfriend, Brendan. Schooling, Reed College, Iowa Writers Workshop. Day job, nope. Notable notes. In 2008, Kate won the PEN/Faulkner Award for her novel The Great Man. Just as the ingredients at hand can dictate a dish, Kate says, the characters who arise in my imagination and are set in motion at the beginning of a novel can dictate its plot, tone, and themes. Kate writes about food and drink for many national publications, including Vogue and Food and Wine. Facebook. Facebook.com/kate.christensen.39 FREF = TS. Twitter @Aquavita. Website blog katechristensen.wordpress.com. The Collected Works. Novels. In the Drink, 1999. Jeremy Thrain, 2001. The Epicure's Lament, 2004. The Great Man, 2007. Trouble, 2009. The Astral, 2011. Nonfiction. Blue Plate Special, 2013. How to Cook a Moose, 2015. Essays, columns, reviews, partial listing. The New York Times Book Review. O, the Oprah Magazine. The Wall Street Journal. L. Book Forum. Vogue. Cherry Bomb. Food and Wine. Kate Christensen. Why I write about myself. My reasons for writing memoir and fiction are the same. I'm hoping to give my readers connection, comfort, reassurance, and, of course, entertainment. I've been a self-chronicler from a very early age, and I've always done that kind of writing alongside writing fiction. When I was 7 or 8, I was always writing made-up stories, and I also kept diaries. This journal-keeping intensified when I was 16, as it did for many of us. It hit a peak in my mid-20s, then tapered off for a number of years, until I stopped. I haven't kept a journal since my mid-30s. All this writing about my own life as it happened, hundreds if not thousands of pages through the years, is remarkable chiefly for its bulk. When I can bear to revisit this outpouring, I'm struck by how analytical I was able to be about my predicaments and struggles, while remaining helpless to change anything about any of them. In hindsight, I think my journal-keeping was a colossal exercise in honing and developing my own point of view. What it wasn't was an agent of self-improvement or a catalyst for change. Keeping journals wasn't therapeutic. It didn't cause or encourage me to better my lot. I practiced a kind of mindful exegesis of daily life, including the vicissitudes of my mostly problematic sexual and romantic relationships and friendships and family ties. I poured out my fears, laid out my plans, hopes, and dreams, and was unrelenting, unsparing in my self-loathing chroniclings of my own failings. All this navel-gazing is virtually unreadable now. At least it is to me. I wrote things as they were, and I stayed stuck. It's frustrating to read them for that reason. I want to yell, "Get out of there! Quit that job! Leave that guy! Get a new apartment! Speak up!" It's a bit like watching a horror movie and wishing you could tell the girl not to go into the abandoned house alone at night. But of course she does it anyway. Almost despite myself, while I was writing so feverishly all those decades, I was improving. Not my life, but my writing. I was creating a voice, an I, as well as practicing a writerly detachment from emotion, an ability to record and relay extreme states in dispassionate, clean prose. This served me well when I began writing novels for real. Looking back on all that journal-keeping, I see it now as a writerly form of finger exercises, etudes and scales for the aspiring novelist. I had a parallel passion, also begun at a young age, reading the published diaries, journals, autobiographies, and biographies of famous people. I was enthralled by anyone else's existence. I was hooked on the things that made a life both singular and universal. I loved reading about both men and women, but the lives of remarkable women gave me an added thrill, because they made me feel as if I had a ringside seat to what I might accomplish someday if I paid attention to the gritty courage of Harriet Tubman, the determination of invincible Louisa May Alcott, the passion and intelligence of Anne Frank. I loved and read them all. Helen Keller and Anne Sullivan, Susan B. Anthony, Florence Nightingale, Eleanor Roosevelt. Every biography I could get my mitts on as a kid, and on into my adult years, too. Food writing is life writing. When I was in my late 20s, living in the proverbial East Village rat hole, always broke and always hungover, and insomniacal with anxiety about the future, nothing was more comforting to me than the intersection of food, life, and language. This is how I discovered and became obsessed with M.F.K. Fisher and her brilliant chronicles of a life in food. She was my gateway drug to the foudoir, as I call it, the writings of people as diverse as Laurie Colwin and Nicholas Freeling, who wrote books about life through the prism of food. Write memoir or hide. You can't do both. Just as reading novels made me want to write them, reading food memoirs made me want to write one myself. But I understood instinctively that I had to wait until my life had a story, an arc, a shape that would lend itself to this sort of enterprise. From my late 20s on, I intended to write a food book as soon as I was ready. Meanwhile, I wrote novels and taught myself to cook and went out to as many restaurants of every kind as I could, at home in New York and on my travels with my then-husband. I immersed myself in food and writing and waited for the intersection of the two to happen. During that time, I was wildly unhappy, lonely, and angry, and I was suppressing these things to try to stay in my untenable marriage. It's impossible to write about yourself when you're hiding. As my 50th birthday approached, I recognized that I had become, against all odds, settled, happy, and fulfilled. This hadn't happened by accident. I had made it happen by making difficult choices that led me to it. With much grief and a sense of dark failure, I'd left my marriage. 7 months later, I fell in love with a man 20 years younger than I was, but in every other way, my perfect match and soulmate. I found myself blessed with a...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?